was making fun of my husband in front of my girlfriends, but suddenly the worst happened. He came up to me and told me it was over. The sickening crunch of my heart shattering echoed through my ears as I watched Ethan walk away, his shoulders set in grim determination. The laughter and chatter of the neighborhood barbecue faded to a dull roar as the gravity of what just happened hit me. My name is Olivia, I'm 23 years old, and I think I just ruined my entire life. It all started on a balmy Saturday afternoon in the quaint town of Millbrook, nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. The air was thick with the scent of grilling burgers and the sweet perfume of booming lilacs. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was hosting her annual summer kickoff party, an event that had become somewhat of a tradition in our close-knit community. I stood amidst a group of women I considered my friends, a glass of chilled rose in my hand, giggling at some inane joke. My husband Ethan was over by the grill, diligently flipping burgers and chatting amiably with the other husbands. He caught my eye and smiled, that same warm, loving smile that had first captured my heart 5 years ago when we were still in college. I should have smiled back. I should have excused myself from the group and gone to give him a kiss to thank him for being such a wonderful partner. Instead, I rolled my eyes and turned back to my friends, launching into yet another story about how Ethan had bent over backwards to please me earlier that week. You wouldn't believe what Ethan did the other day. I began, my voice tinged with a mixture of amusement and disdain. I mentioned offhandedly that I was craving sushi from that place in the city, the one that's impossible to get reservations for. Well, the next day he surprised me with a reservation for that evening. He'd apparently called in some favor with a client just to get us a table. The women around me cooed and sighed, expressing their envy, but I wasn't finished. And get this, I continued, lowering my voice conspiratorially. When we got there, I decided I wasn't in the mood for sushi anymore. I wanted Italian instead. And you know what Ethan did? He just smiled, canceled our reservation and took me to that trattoria down the street. Didn't complain once. I laughed, shaking my head. I swear, that man would bend himself into a pretzel if I asked him to. Sometimes I wonder if he has any backbone at all. The laughter that followed my words was cut short by a sudden silence. I turned, my stomach dropping as I saw Ethan standing there, his face a mask of hurt and disbelief. The plate of burgers in his hands trembled slightly. Ethan. I began, but he cut me off with a sharp shake of his head. We need to talk, he said, his voice low and controlled. Now. As he led me away from the group, I could feel the eyes of everyone at the party on us. My cheeks burned with shame, but part of me was still in denial about the severity of the situation. Surely Ethan would forgive me. He always did. We stopped at the far end of the yard, hidden from view by Mrs. Patterson's prized hydrangea bushes. Ethan set the plate of burgers down on a nearby table and turned to face me, his usually warm brown eyes now cold and distant. "Undone, Olivia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I blinked, not comprehending. "What do you mean, done?" "I mean undone with this marriage. Undone being your punching bag. Undone being the butt of your jokes. Undone being disrespected by you and everyone else because you've made it clear that I'm not worthy of respect." His words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, shaking my head in denial. "Ethan, come on. It was just a joke. I didn't mean." "Didn't mean what, Olivia?" He interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Didn't mean to humiliate me in front of our friends. Didn't mean to make me feel like less than a man. Didn't mean to take advantage of my love for you." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Ethan, please. I'm sorry. I didn't realize." "That's the problem, Olivia. You never realize. You never stop to think about how your actions affect others. How they affect me." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign of his frustration. "I've put up with it for years, thinking that if I just loved you enough, if I just tried hard enough, you'd see me. Really see me. But you don't, do you?" I reached out to touch his arm, but he flinched away. The action sent a spike of pain through my heart. "Ethan, I do see you. I love you. Please, let's just go home and talk about this." He shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "There's nothing left to talk about, Olivia. I'm leaving. When you get home, your things will be packed and waiting for you on the porch. I don't want you in the house anymore. The finality in his voice sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't like our usual arguments, where I could sweet-talk my way out of trouble, or where Ethan would eventually cave in to keep the peace. This was different. This was the end. You can't be serious, I said, my voice rising in panic. Ethan, this is our home. Our life. You can't just throw it all away over one stupid comment. It's not just one comment, Olivia. It's years of comments. Years of disrespect. Years of me giving everything I have to this relationship while you take and take and take. He looked at me then, and the pain in his eyes made my breath catch. I love you, Olivia. God help me, I probably always will. But I can't do this anymore. I won't. With that he turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone among the hydrangeas, the sounds of the party a stark contrast to the turmoil in my heart. I watched him make his way through the crowd, stopping briefly to say goodbye to our hosts before disappearing down the street towards our house. Our house, the thought jolted me into action. I hurried after him, ignoring the curious stares and whispered comments from our neighbors. By the time I reached our home, a quaint two-story colonial we bought just a year ago, Ethan was already inside. I burst through the front door, calling his name. The sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks. Ethan was in the living room, methodically packing my clothes into suitcases. Ethan, stop, I pleaded, moving to grab the shirt he was folding. Please, let's just talk about this. He jerked the shirt away from me, his jaw clenched. There's nothing to talk about, Olivia. I've made my decision. But you can't just kick me out, I cried, desperation clawing at my throat. This is my home too. Ethan pours in his packing, fixing me with a hard stare. Actually, it's not. The house is in my name, remember? You insisted on it because you didn't want to be tied down to a mortgage. The memory of that conversation flooded back to me. I had indeed pushed for Ethan to buy the house on his own, arguing that it would be better for our finances. In reality, I had wanted an easy out if things ever got tough. I never imagined it would backfire on me like this. Ethan, please, I begged, tears streaming down my face. I'm sorry. I'll do better. I'll change. Just give me another chance. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But then he shook his head, his resolve hardening. I've given you chances, Olivia. More chances than I should have. It's too late now. He finished packing my clothes and moved on to my personal items. I watched helplessly as he efficiently packed away my life, occasionally asking me where I wanted certain things. The surreal nature of the situation made me feel like I was watching a movie of someone else's life falling apart. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our once happy home, Ethan carried the last of my suitcases to the front porch. I stood in the whisper. Ethan sighed, running a hand over his face. For the first time I noticed how tired he looked, how the lines around his eyes seemed deeper than I remembered. Call your parents, Olivia. Or one of your friends. I don't know. But you can't stay here. And what about us? I asked, clinging to the last shred of hope. Is this really it? He looked at me, then re-looked at me, and I saw a lifetime of love and pain in his eyes. Yeah, Olivia, this is really it. I'll have my lawyer draw up the divorce papers next week. With that, he gently but firmly guided me onto the porch and closed the door. I heard the lock click into place, the sound echoing with a chilling finality. I sank down onto the porch steps, surrounded by my hastily packed life, and let the tears flow freely. The weight of my actions, of years of thoughtlessness and disrespect, crushed down on me. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed my father's number. Dad, I said when he answered, my voice choked with tears. Can you come get me? I've made a terrible mistake. The next few days passed in a blur of tears and regret. My parents welcomed me back home with open arms, though I could see the disappointment in their eyes. They had always adored Ethan, viewing him as the son they never had. Now, as I recounted the events that led to our separation, I could see them struggling to understand how I could have treated someone they considered family so poorly. I spent most of my time holed up in my chandered bedroom, alternating between crying to my pillow and staring blankly at the walls. The cheery yellow paint and faded posters from my teenage years seemed to mock me, reminders of a simpler time when my biggest worry was what to wear to prom. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends who had heard about what happened at the barbecue. Most were a mix of concern and curiosity, eager for the juicy details of my marital breakdown. A few, like my supposed best friend Alexis, were more sympathetic, offering words of support and promises to be there for me. But as the days wore on and the reality of my situation sank in, I began to see these friendships for what they truly were: shallow connections built on gossip and mutual self-interest. None of them really cared about me or my pain; they were just happy to have some drama to discuss over their morning coffee. It was during one of my rare ventures out of my room, on a trip to the kitchen for a glass of water, that I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones. "I just don't understand how she could have been so thoughtless," my mother was saying, her voice tinged with sadness. "We raised her better than that." My father sighed heavily. "I know, dear, but Olivia's always been, well, you know how she is, always wanting to be the center of attention, never really thinking about how her actions affect others." "But Ethan," my mother replied, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "He was so good to her, so patient. Remember how he used to bring her breakfast in bed every Sunday, or how he'd surprise her with little gifts for no reason at all." "I know," my father said softly, "he loved her more than anything and she threw it all away." I retreated back to my room, their words ringing in my ears. For the first time, I truly began to see myself through others' eyes. The image wasn't flattering. That night, unable to sleep, I decided to do something I should have done days ago. I opened my laptop and started a new document. At the top I typed ways I had Ethan. As I began to list out all the times I had taken Ethan for granted, all the times I had belittled him or dismissed his feelings, all the times I had put my own desires above his needs, the document grew longer and longer. By the time the first rays of dawn began to peek through my curtains, I had filled page after page with my transgressions. Reading through the list was like a punch to the gut. How had I become this person? How had I allowed myself to treat someone I claimed to love with such callous disregard? With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. I knew it was early, but I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to talk to Ethan, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness if necessary. But when I pulled up his contact, my thumb hovering over the call button, I hesitated. What right did I have to disturb his peace? To force him to confront the pain I had caused him? And what would I even say? In that moment, I realized that my desire to call him was just another selfish act. I wanted to ease my own guilt, to make myself feel better. But what about what Ethan needed? With a heavy heart, I put my phone down. For once in my life, I decided to put someone else's needs before my own. If Ethan wanted space, I would give him space. If he wanted to move on without me, as much as it hurt, I would respect his decision. Instead, I opened my laptop again and started a new document. This time I titled it, "How to Become a Better Person." It was time for me to do the hard work of self-reflection and personal growth. Not for Ethan, not to win him back, but for myself. Because I never wanted to be the kind of person who hurt someone they loved ever again. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. Life went on as it tends to do, even when you feel like your world has stopped turning. I remained at my parents' house, slowly piecing together the shattered remnants of my life. The divorce proceedings were mercifully quick and straightforward. Ethan, ever the gentleman, didn't try to fight me on anything. He even agreed to a small alimony payment, despite the fact that I had contributed little financially to our marriage. His kindness, even in the face of our separation, was just another reminder of what I had thrown away. I got a job, an entry-level position at a local marketing firm. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly data entry and coffee runs, but it was a start. For the first time in my adult life, I was supporting myself, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of earning my own money. My social life, once the center of my world, had dwindled to almost nothing. Most of my so-called friends had drifted away once they realized I was no longer a source of gossip or entertainment. Alexis stuck around for a while, but even she eventually stopped calling when it became clear that I was no longer interested in our old lifestyle of parties and mindless chatter. The silence and solitude, once my greatest fears, became my teachers. In the quiet of my room, with only my thoughts for company, I began the hard work of self-improvement. I read self-help books, started journaling and even began seeing a therapist to work through my issues. Dr. Larson, my therapist, was a kind but no-nonsense woman in her 50s. In our sessions, she helped me unpack years of selfish behavior and skewed perceptions. Olivia, she said during one particularly difficult session, have you ever considered why you felt the need to belittle Ethan in front of your friends? I shrugged, picking at a loose thread on the arm of the chair. I guess I thought it made me look good. Like I had this great guy who would do anything for me, and I was so amazing that he put up with anything. Dr. Larson nodded thoughtfully. And how do you think that made Ethan feel? The question hit me like a ton of bricks. For perhaps the first time in my life, I truly put myself in Ethan's shoes. I imagined how it must have felt to constantly be the butt of jokes, to have his love and devotion mocked and taken for granted. Horrible, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. It must have made him feel so small, so worthless. Exactly, Dr. Larson said gently. Olivia, true love isn't about control or showing off. It's about mutual respect, support and kindness. It's about lifting each other up, not tearing each other down. Her words stayed with me long after the session ended. I began to see all my past relationships, not just with Ethan but with friends and family as well, in a new light. I realized how often I had prioritized my own needs and desires over everyone else's, how I had used people for my own gain without considering their feelings. It was a painful realization but a necessary one. I knew that if I ever wanted to have healthy relationships in the future, I needed to make some serious changes. One day, about 6 months after the fateful barbecue, I ran into Mrs. Patterson at the local grocery store. I had been avoiding most of our old neighbors, too ashamed to face them after the way things had ended with Ethan. But there was no escaping the kind-faced woman as she spotted me in the produce aisle. "Olivia dear," she called out, pushing her cart towards me. "How are you?" I forced a smile, bracing myself for the awkward conversation ahead. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson. I'm doing okay. How are you?" To my surprise, Mrs. Patterson's face softened with genuine concern. "Of honey," she said, reaching out to pat my arm. "I've been worried about you. We all have." Her kindness, so unexpected, brought tears to my eyes. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, hastily wiping at my cheeks. I've made such a mess of everything." Mrs. Patterson glanced around, then gently steered me towards a quiet corner of the store. "Listen, Olivia," she said, her voice low and kind. "We all make mistakes. Lord knows I've made my fair share. The important thing is that we learn from them." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Have you talked to Ethan recently?" she asked carefully. I shook my head. "No, I've been giving him space. I don't think he wants to hear from me." Mrs. Patterson sighed. "You might be surprised, dear. Ethan's been asking about you, you know." My head snapped up, hope flaring in my chest. "He has." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "He's worried about you, wants to know if you're okay." The knowledge that Ethan still cared enough to ask about me, even after everything I'd done, was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. It was just so Ethan. Always thinking of others, even when they didn't deserve it. "I don't deserve his concern," I said softly. Mrs. Patterson clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Now none of that. We all deserve compassion, Olivia. Even when we've made mistakes, especially then." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad and pen. Quickly scribbling something down, she tore off the page and handed it to me. "This is Ethan's new number," she said. "He changed it a while back, I think. I think he might appreciate hearing from you." I staved at the number, my heart racing. "I don't know if I can," I whispered. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my arm gently. "You don't have to decide right now, just think about it, okay?" I nodded, carefully folding the paper and tucking it into my pocket. As Mrs. Patterson said goodbye and continued with her shopping, I stood there, feeling as if the world had shifted on its axis. That night I sat on my bed, staring at the piece of paper with Ethan's number. My phone lay beside me, silent and accusing. I picked it up, my fingers hovering over the keypad. What would I even say? How do you apologize for years of thoughtlessness and disrespect? How do you ask forgiveness from someone you've hurt so deeply? In the end, I decided on a text. It felt cowardly, but I knew if I heard his voice, I might lose my nerve completely. Ethan, I typed, my hands shaking slightly. It's Olivia. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I completely understand if you don't respond. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for what happened at the barbecue, but for everything. For all the times I took you for granted, for all the times I made you feel less than the amazing person you are. You deserve so much better. I'm truly, deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. I hope you're doing well and finding happiness. You deserve it more than anyone I know. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then promptly threw my phone across the room as if it had burned me. My heart was pounding and I felt slightly nauseous. What had I done? For the next few hours I alternated between pacing my room and staring at my phone, waiting for it to buzz with a response. But as the night wore on and no message came, I began to accept that Ethan had moved on. And really, wasn't that what I wanted for him? To be happy, even if it meant a life without me in it. Just as I was about to give up and try to get some sleep, my phone lit up with a new message. My heart in my throat, I opened it. Olivia, it read. Thank you for your message. It means a lot to hear that from you. I hope you're doing well too. Take care. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small olive branch extended across the chasm I had created between us. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't experienced in months, hope. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work, therapy sessions and quiet nights at home. I threw myself into self-improvement with a fervor that surprised even me. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding joy in caring for creatures that ask for nothing but love in return. I took up yoga and meditation, learning to quiet the constant chatter in my mind and find peace and stillness. Ethan and I exchanged a few more text messages, each one cordial but distant. We didn't discuss getting back together or even meeting in person. It was clear that while he no longer harbored anger towards me, the trust between us had been irreparably broken. It was during this time that I ran into an old acquaintance from the neighborhood, Sarah. She had never been part of my inner circle, mainly because my friend Alexis had some sort of unexplained issue with her. But now, free from the toxic influence of my former friends, I found myself genuinely enjoying Sarah's company. We met for coffee one afternoon, and as we chatted, Sarah filled me in on the neighborhood gossip. I listened with a mixture of interest and detachment, realizing how much I had changed in the past months. The petty dramas that once consumed my life now seemed trivial and unimportant. Oh, and get this, as Sarah said, leaning in conspiratorially. You know your ex-friends Alexis, Tina and the rest? I nodded, a sense of unease creeping over me. Well, word on the street is they've all been trying to get with Ethan, Sarah said, her eyes wide. Can you believe it? The same women who used to laugh at your jokes about him are now falling all over themselves to catch his attention. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a confusing mix of emotions. Anger at my former friend's disloyalty, jealousy at the thought of Ethan with someone else, and a deep aching sadness to the relationships I had destroyed. Has he shown interest in any of them? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah shook her head. Not from what I've heard. Ethan's been keeping to himself mostly, focuses on his work, goes to the gym a lot. He seems, I don't know, more confident somehow. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips despite the pain in my heart. That sounded like Ethan, using adversity as a chance for personal growth. You know, Sarah said softly, reaching out to touch my hand, I never really understood why you and I were closer before. I always thought you seemed nice underneath all the, well, you know. I laughed ruefully. Underneath all the drama and selfishness, you mean? Sarah smiled sympathetically. We all have our moments, Olivia. The important thing is that you're trying to be better now. That counts for a lot in my book. Her words warmed me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the stirrings of a genuine friendship forming. As the months continued to pass, I found myself settling into a new rhythm of life. My job at the marketing firm had evolved into a more challenging role, and I was thriving on my responsibility. My relationship with my parents had improved dramatically as they saw the changes I was making in my life, and my friendship with Sarah had blossomed into a true connection based on mutual respect and shared interests. But despite these positive changes, there was still an Ethan-shaped hole in my heart. I missed him with an ache that never quite went away, a constant reminder of what I had carelessly thrown away. It was on a crisp autumn day, almost a year after our separation, that I ran into Ethan for the first time since that fateful barbecue. I was leaving my favorite coffee shop, a stack of files tucked under one arm and a latte in my free hand, when I quite literally bumped into him. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, trying to balance my coffee and keep my files from spilling everywhere. Then I looked up and met a pair of familiar brown eyes. "Ethan," I breathed, feeling as if all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "Olivia," he replied, his voice soft and uncertain. "Here, let me help you with that." He reached out and steadied my coffee cup, his fingers brushing against mine for a brief moment. Even that slight touch sent a jolt through my system. "Thank you," I managed to say, my heart pounding. "How are you?" Ethan smiled, and I was struck by how good he looked. He'd always been handsome, but now there was a confidence about him that was undeniably attractive. "I'm doing well," he said. "How about you? Sarah mentioned you've been working at Millbrook Marketing." The fact that he knew this, that he'd asked about me, made my pulse quicken. "Yes, I have," I replied. "It's been challenging, but in a good way. I'm learning a lot." Ethan nodded approvingly. "That's great, Olivia. I'm happy for you." An awkward silence fell between us. There was so much I wanted to say, so many apologies I wanted to make. But the words stuck in my throat. "Listen," Ethan said finally, running a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of nervousness. "I was just about to grab a coffee. Would you like to join me? To catch up?" The offer took me by surprise. For a moment, I was transported back to our college days, when we'd spend hours in coffee shops talking about everything and nothing. But we weren't those carefree kids anymore. We were two adults with a painful history between us. "Are you sure?" I asked hesitantly. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable." Ethan's smile was gentle. "I'm sure, I think it might be good for us to talk." And so, with butterflies in my stomach and hope blooming in my chest, I followed Ethan back into the coffee shop. We settled into a quiet corner booth, our hands wrapped around steaming mugs. For a few moments we sat in silence, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy between us. So Ethan began, his voice soft but steady. "Have you really been, Olivia?" I took a deep breath, deciding at that moment to be completely honest. "It's been hard. I admit it. Losing you, realizing how badly I'd messed up. It was like waking up from a long, selfish dream. But it's also been eye-opening. I've learned a lot about myself, about the kind of person I want to be." Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm glad to hear that. You seem different. More grounded." "I'm trying to be," I said. "I've been." When I woke up in the morning, nothing seemed out of the ordinary except that my wife, Debbie, wasn't in bed next to me. I am usually up a little earlier because I start work at 8 o'clock and my wife not until 9:30. I completed my morning routine and was heading downstairs to get the coffee ready for my wife and me when I smelled the coffee already being made. When I got downstairs, there was my wife already dressed for work, sitting at the corner breakfast table. She smiled at me and we said our good mornings. As I was grabbing a cup of coffee, my wife said, "I have to go into work early this morning for a meeting. I will be off at 5 o'clock and come straight home so we can talk as soon as you get home." It caught me a little off guard and I raised an eyebrow and asked, "Oh, did I forget something? What do we need to talk about?" Debbie just waved a hand at me and said that we would talk about it later, that it was nothing that couldn't wait. With that, she got up, put her cup in the sink, kissed me goodbye and was out the door before I could respond. Before getting much further into this story, I should tell you a little about us. I am Tim Johnson. My wife, Debbie, and I have been married for over 41 years. That's right, we married right out of high school when we were 18 years old. We knew each other since second grade, dated all through high school, and we both knew we were meant to be together for the rest of our lives. Neither of us ever dated anyone else, and as such we learned about sex together and were our only sexual partners. Hell, I never even kissed another woman other than a peck on the cheek in greeting, and I assume it was the same with my wife. We went to the same college as a married couple, living in a cheap apartment with part-time jobs to see us through. I had the GI Bill to help with school costs and her parents helped her out, so while it was a bit of a struggle, it wasn't all that harsh in existence. In fact, we started our family while we were still in college. Our oldest child, Terry, is 37 years old, married with 2 children. She is a family law attorney for an out-of-state firm. Our second, Darcy, is 35 and single, working in Washington, D.C. as an assistant to a director in the Department of Agriculture. Our baby, Sydney, is 34 and married to a police officer in our hometown. She has our other 2 grandchildren and is a hard-working stay-at-home mom. We are very proud of all 3 of our girls. After school, I got a job as a risk analyst for a large insurance corporation, and Debbie became a grammar school teacher for the local school district and later worked in the administration office part-time. At 59, we are both in excellent health and physical condition. We have both always been very active. I golf, swim, and go to the gym at least 3 times a week. My wife, however, puts me to shame with her workout discipline. She is at the gym 5 days a week and is an avid distance runner pretty much every day. I may be biased, but she is still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. She weighs the same as she did the day we got married. Not bad for 3 kids and 41 years. When we were young, she was so beautiful that when she entered a room, even the women would stop to stare at her. To this day, she draws attention from men half her age, but she always handles herself with class and dignity. Debbie and I talk about it all the time. Our family life is the epitome of the American dream. We were so lucky to have found each other, and we thank our lucky stars for the life we lead every day. Unlike most men, when they hear words to the effect of "honey, we have to talk," I wasn't filled with dread or breaking out into cold sweats. I was curious, but we talk all the time. Family meetings, we called them, and we had them even before we had children. It was our way of planning our lives. But she didn't say we were going to have a family meeting, did she? At work, I wasn't consumed with angst about the upcoming meeting, but I did daydream a bit about a very memorable lovemaking session the night before. Debbie is a very vocal and direct lover. She is not at all bashful about telling me what she wants and making sure she gets it. She never faked an orgasm because long ago, we discussed that we had to be honest with each other and strive to make our love life better. Faking orgasms wouldn't help. Debbie isn't one of those ladies that will have a series of small orgasms. When she goes over the edge, it is with an incredible amount of screaming. Her whole body quivers as her eyes roll up into her head, and sometimes she even passes out for a few seconds. She doesn't even want to be touched for a few minutes because her whole body is so sensitive. It is amazing to watch and be a part of. She tells me all the time that she would never cheat on me because it would take too long to train a new lover. After 41 years of marriage, we still make love 2 to 3 times a week. Another thing she tells me often, as she did last night, is that while my meat may not work like it did when I was 25, my lips, tongue, and fingers are magic and working better than ever. All in all, we enjoy a very satisfying love life well into our middle age. As my curiosity was aroused, I left work a little early and headed home. I wanted to get home before Debbie so I could change, get comfortable with a glass of my favorite single malt scotch, and find out what our talk was about. My curiosity started to turn to worry when I pulled into the garage and saw that my wife's 7-year-old Camry was already there. My worry deepened when I saw her sitting at the table with a glass of wine in her hand, and my scotch already poured and placed at my seat. She looked very distraught as she was continually rubbing her knee with her free hand. This was a nervous habit of hers ever since I knew her. I asked if I could change before we started. She replied, "No, I want to do this right now. Please sit down." I didn't argue. As I was sitting down, I was convinced she was going to tell me that she was sick. I felt my chest getting tight and was having difficulty breathing normally. I looked into her eyes and saw, well, I don't know what I saw, but I knew I had never seen that look in her eyes or that facial expression before. She seemed nervous and her voice was breaking as she spoke in a very low, deliberate manner. "Tim, there is something I have been thinking about for quite a while and I need to get this out without interruption. Please let me finish before you speak so that I can make you understand how important this is to me." As she continued, she seemed to gain a little more confidence. "And I need you to not lose your temper and turn this into a childish yelling match. Can you do that for me, please?" I nodded my head slowly without speaking. Well, at least she wasn't going to tell me that she was sick, but I suspected it was going to be much worse, and I was right. Honey, you know that I love you more than life itself. I have loved only you since grade school. There has never been anyone else in my lifetime. My chest was hurting more, my breathing becoming more difficult, and an aching pain began in my shoulder as she continued. You and I are going to spend our old age together, bouncing our great-grandchildren on our knees. We are going to travel the world together, but there is something that I have to do. The pain in my shoulder was now shooting down my left arm and I was getting dizzy. I couldn't catch my breath. Tim, pay attention. This is very important. I just nodded and thought this couldn't be happening to me. Well, I have been thinking for months about this, and there is something I have to do before I am too old. The room started spinning and it felt like someone was standing on my chest. I am going to date other men to see what I have been missing all these years. It won't last forever, maybe 6 months, and I will be back to being your loving wife, proving to you every day how deep my love for you is. I started to say something, but nothing would come out of my mouth. Then everything went black. Light was creeping in from the darkness, trying to break through the haze. I was trying to open my eyes, but my eyelids must have weighed 5 pounds each. I struggled mightily to get them open and finally accomplished the task. Where was I? What were those beeping noises? How come I couldn't move? My throat was very sore. What is my name? I must be in the hospital. What happened to me? All these thoughts were rushing through my head when I remembered that I was Tim Johnson and I was in a hospital because my wife tried to kill me. Why did she try to kill me? My brain was working a little better. I was at the kitchen table. She was talking. Then I remembered the conversation. It wasn't really a conversation. It was her telling me something, telling me that she was going to kill me. As the fog in my brain cleared, I noticed a nurse standing at my bedside, looking down at me and smiling. Welcome back, Mr. Johnson. My name is Nurse Smith. You are in Mercy Hospital because you had a very serious heart attack a few days ago. It is called the Widowmaker and you are lucky to be alive. Funny, I didn't feel lucky. It's 3 a.m., and the doctor will be by later this morning to explain in more detail about your condition. I tried to talk, but nothing came out because my throat was so sore and dry. Don't try to talk, Mr. Johnson. You had a ventilator in your throat, so it will take a couple of days to heal itself. I was thinking more clearly now and made a writing motion with my hand. Nurse Smith handed me a pad of paper and a pen. I wrote in big, bold print, "No visitors." She responded, "Oh no, you have had lots of visitors. Your wife and daughters have been here." She must have noticed me and stopped talking. I wrote furiously, "I don't want any visitors." She seemed startled but asked, "Are you sure?" I just nodded my head. I scribbled another note, "Do not share my medical information with anyone." Her eyebrows arched up, but she just nodded her head. As I was writing another note, I asked, "Is there someone here at the hospital that can help me complete a DNR? Do not resuscitate? Order." With that, I am sure I shocked Nurse Smith, but she held her composure. "Your condition isn't nearly that severe," she began, but I interrupted her by tapping furiously on the notepad. "I will pass your wishes onto the day shift." She patted me on the shoulder and left my room quietly. I figured my life was over anyway, so if something happened, why let the medical community resuscitate me? The way my luck was going, I would probably survive but be turned into a vegetable. So screw it. Plus, there would be the added shock benefit when my wife found out what I did and how badly she had hurt me. I didn't fall back asleep. I had been asleep for a few days, so all I could do was lay there, think and make plans. I said I did risk analysis for an insurance company, but really my job was to help my company's clients do risk analysis for their organizations. It was a service my company offered, and many clients took advantage of it. I had done it for a number of years, was good at it, and got paid accordingly. In my experience, all companies are afraid of something, but my job was to make sure they were afraid of the right things and offer solutions to mitigate those threats. There is a process involved in accomplishing that analysis, so I decided to adopt the same strategy to solve my problem. You know, the problem of why my wife would want to kill me. I know my wife didn't really try to kill me with her statement, but she damn near accomplished it. The actions I had just taken would buy me time, and time is what I needed to figure this out. As I lay there in bed, waiting for dawn to break, I began the process of analyzing my situation. I am one of those weird people that when I think I have a conversation with myself, and this was no different. Okay, Tim, you've bought yourself some time. Now let's think about the real issues here. It really wasn't all that unusual for my wife to talk very directly and succinctly, so she wasn't trying to shock me with her statements. It was just how she approached things her whole life. What did she say? She had thought about it for months. Was there anything I should have noticed? Changes in her behavior? Had she been giving me verbal hints that I had missed? Could she have already been cheating on me? The answer is no to all of those. Debbie isn't flighty or prone to acting spur of the moment. While she is deliberate, once she formulates a course of action, she doesn't hesitate or waffle. She goes after it. Another very important fact is she didn't say she would like to date other guys. She said she was going to date other guys. So, Tim, this means you have a real problem that probably won't just go away because she put you in the hospital. Damn. So, Tim, here are the outcomes that I can see. 1. You could just let her date guys and hope that sooner or later she gets it out of her system and we can go back to how things were. 2. You can try to talk her out of it because frankly I don't see myself being the kind of husband that shares his wife. 3. Just divorce her now and be done with it. Or 4. You could just die now and not have to worry about it. Frankly, number 4 is not looking too bad right now. Apparently I was wrong though. I could fall asleep because the next thing I knew, daylight was streaming in through the window, and the clock on the wall said it was 10:40. Shortly after I awoke, a doctor did come by and explain that a widowmaker heart attack is caused by a complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery of the heart. He said I was very lucky because this type of heart attack has a very low survival rate. If my wife hadn't been with me and called 911 right away, I would have died. Okay, he was the second person to tell me how lucky I was, but I still wasn't feeling it. I asked him if severe stress could cause this type of attack. He said, well, yes, severe emotional trauma could trigger it, but your heart problem has to have existed for a while. It is caused by a combination of genetics and high cholesterol. Why do you ask? I explained as best I could what had transpired between my wife and me. He commented, well, that explains your request for no visitors in the DNR. Mr. Johnson, you will be here for a few more days, but you are going to need lots of rest and quiet during your recovery period, which will take some time. We were able to put a stent in instead of doing a bypass, so that should shorten your recovery time. I can't help you with your personal problems, but I strongly recommend that you see a counselor to help you with your issues once you're on the road to recovery. Believe it or not, one of the most frequent side effects of a heart attack like this is depression, and it's obvious to me with your relationship issues you will be at high risk. With that, he left the room, no goodbye, nothing. I don't blame him. Doctors don't usually like to get personal with patients. They just give them pills or operate on them and then get out. Then another doctor who told me she was the hospitalist came in and went over all the drugs I was going to need for the next year or so. It was a damn pharmacy list. Yep, solution 4 was looking better all the time. Shortly after the hospitalist left, I heard a commotion in the hallway. The commotion was my wife being told that she couldn't see me. After causing quite a scene, she asked about my condition. They actually had to call security and have her forcibly removed when she was told that I specifically said she was not to be told my condition. For the first time since she hit me with her plans, I felt a little better. It's childish, I know, but still it was a small victory. Apparently the doctor, after having learned my situation, had ordered a sedative for me. Either that, or I was so tired I slept on and off for over 24 hours. When I awoke again it was the middle of the night, and Nurse Smith was standing at my bedside. I'm glad to see you awake, she said cheerily. Can you try speaking a little for me? I was able to speak, although with a little hoarseness, but at least I could talk. Thank goodness. She asked if we could talk and I nodded my head yes, but only if she called me Tim. She laughed and said that was fine and to please call her Beth. She started out by saying she had been updated on my situation, and understood more about why I had set up the no-visitor policy, but was still concerned about the DNR request. I told her to forget the DNR, I didn't really want to die. I knew that sooner or later I would have to talk with my wife, but I certainly didn't want to do that until I had recovered sufficiently. Beth then told me that she understood, but that she had to kick my wife and all 3 girls off the ward shortly before I woke up. She told me what I already knew, that I would have to talk with my wife at some point, but given the circumstances maybe I could talk with my daughters. At this point it struck me how much, if anything, did my daughters know about what their mother had said to me. The girls were very close to their mother, and it could be that they knew in advance what she was going to say. Probably not, but Debbie was especially close to Darcy. Even though she was in Washington, D.C., they talked just about every day on the phone, so maybe Darcy was aware. Maybe Debbie had told the girls the truth after what happened to me. At any rate, I agreed with Beth that I should talk to the girls, especially because the older ones had traveled a great distance to be near me. Beth said that she would contact them and have them return to speak with me, but only one at a time. I told her in no uncertain terms, though, that I wasn't going to talk with my wife, and she understood. I thought it interesting that the girls were back outside my room within 5 minutes. Apparently, Beth had only kicked them to the waiting room. I'm pretty sure the fix was in, but I did want to see my girls, so what the heck. I did talk with each of my daughters that evening but told them I didn't want to talk about their mother. I wanted them to know how glad I was to see them and that I loved them very much. I had tears in my eyes and became quite emotional when I finally realized how close I had come to never seeing them again. Sydney did manage to sneak in that Debbie had told all 3 of them that she blamed herself for what happened to me, but with no specifics. I didn't argue the point with Sydney, and I know she found that interesting. She also mentioned that Debbie promised to sit down with them tomorrow and explain further. Terry and Darcy did tell me that they would be taking extended time off to help with my recovery. I was overwhelmed with emotion, and Beth had to put an end to the visit. After the visits with my daughters, I knew that no matter what happened with Debbie, life would go on. My life was going to be more complicated, but it wasn't going to end. I just needed to decide what to do about my relationship with my wife. Was there even a point in talking to her about it? Even if she scraped her dating plans, could I still live with her? I needed to answer that question before talking with her. Maybe the girls could help me with the decision. If Sydney was right, Debbie would have filled them in on what precipitated my heart attack, so their perspective might help me. Cheating doesn't just affect the couple's relationship, it affects the whole family. A very interesting development was that my wife and daughters decided that when released from the hospital, I would stay at our house while my wife would move in with Sydney's family into their guest room. Terry and Darcy would alternate providing whatever care I would need for a few weeks. The doctors were confident that I would be back to normal activity within 5 to 6 weeks. I was content with the arrangements but thought it very odd that in the first 2 weeks I was home, my wife never made a single attempt to contact me, not even a text message. Perhaps the girls read her the riot act and told her to back off. Or could she be using the opportunity to go out on dates? I just didn't know, but really I wasn't up to a direct confrontation. I decided to speak with Darcy first, as she had always been closest to her mother and would possibly give me a peek into my wife's state of mind. Darcy and I met alone at the house, and she knew ahead of time that I wanted to talk about the incident with her. Like my wife, I am a pretty direct person, so as soon as Darcy walked into the room, I blurted out, "Darcy, how long have you known about your mother's desire to date other men?" We talked about it some." She mumbled without making contact. "How long, Darcy?" I growled. "I'm sorry, Dad. About 3 to 4 months. My blood pressure was rising and I was losing control already. This wasn't good. I needed to calm down. I'm sorry, Darcy. I didn't mean to yell at you. I really want your input here. This has hit me really hard. I had no idea your mother wasn't happy with our relationship. It's literally breaking my heart." I tried a little levity to calm myself. "Oh, Dad, she loves you very much, and this doesn't mean anything. She just wants to experience some things before she gets too old. It shouldn't reflect on your relationship at all." "Do you really believe that?" "I mean, really, Darcy, how can her having sex with other men not mean anything to me? I'm flabbergasted that you can say that. So your opinion is that I should allow her to have sex with other men so she can experience more in her life, then return to me as if nothing has happened?" "Well, maybe not as if nothing has happened, but your love for her should be strong enough to get past this. She has devoted her entire life to you, to all of us, and she just wants this for herself. Really, Dad, you're 59 years old and you have probably slowed down some. It's normal that mom wants to experience younger men. It's a natural thing for a woman to want to experience. Now there was a shocker. I figured Debbie didn't want to date old men, but hearing that from my daughter really hit home. It was all about sex. While I may have slowed down, I thought I still did pretty good, but I guess I was wrong. Shouldn't her love for me be strong enough that she shouldn't have to date other men to be fulfilled? And what if I have slowed down? That's a reason for her to cheat on me? Don't be silly, Dad. It wouldn't be cheating if you knew about it. That's why she tried to talk to you about it. We went around and around for another 5 to 10 minutes, but really didn't get anywhere. Darcy's opinion was very clear on the subject. I had to end this conversation before I exploded. In an almost childlike voice, Darcy asked, "What are you going to do, Dad?" "I don't know, Darcy. I just don't know. But there isn't any way I can live with your mom sleeping with other men. I am just not made that way." I knew full well that Debbie would know the particulars of our conversation in short order. We hugged and said our goodbyes. I thought to myself that I hoped Darcy never married, or at least disclosed her beliefs up front to her fiancé. My conversation with Terry was about the exact opposite. She came into the room all charged up and spat out, "I can't believe that old hag is doing this to us." "Whoa," I said with my hand up near her face. "That's your mother you're talking about, and she isn't doing it to us. She is doing it to me." "Get real, Dad. When someone in the family cheats, it affects us all. So yes, she's cheating on her family." "Whoa there. You said she is not that she is going to cheat. You really are clueless, aren't you, Dad? She has been going out with men since you were in the hospital. I think she was doing it before you had your heart attack. I don't think she has slept with any of them yet, but she is definitely auditioning them." I suspected that my relationship with Darcy was pretty much over after that revelation. I wouldn't be surprised if she was setting up dates for Debbie. It was odd, I kept waiting for another heart attack or at least a stroke, but it didn't happen. I felt only sadness because at that point I knew my marriage was over. The truth was, I wasn't really surprised Debbie did it. She was always headstrong. But why did she call the paramedics when I had the heart attack? It didn't make any sense unless, in her own bizarre fashion, I guess she did at least like me. All I could do was shake my head. I again wondered if there was really any reason to sit down and talk with her. Terry and I talked for a while longer, mostly about divorce laws in our state. It really wasn't that complicated. In a no-fault state, it was pretty much a 50-50 split of all assets. Terry did say I might want to look into a legal separation if I wasn't sure about divorcing Debbie. I told her I would look into it but didn't think it mattered really. Terry also told me that while my wife couldn't stop a divorce, she could really drag it out. That caught my attention, and I decided to seek legal advice as soon as possible. Terry said she would send me some recommendations for lawyers the next day. My conversation with Sydney was pretty much me trying to console her as she couldn't stop crying. Her focus was for me to let Debbie come home. I reminded her that I didn't send her away. She could come home anytime she wanted. The house was as much hers as mine. I did ask her a couple of pointed questions. "Sydney, has your mother been going out on dates since my hospital stay?" While I already knew the answer, I wanted confirmation. Sydney just nodded her head and kept on crying. "How often, Sid?" Through her tears, she choked out, "Just about every night, Dad." I tried talking to her about it. I told her she was cheating on you, and she said she wasn't because she wasn't sleeping with any of them. Besides, she had told you what she was going to do. All I could do was shake my head in disbelief. Before Sydney left, I called her mother and told her that I was feeling better, and that she could certainly return to her home anytime she wanted. I emphasized, though, that I thought she should do it soon because Sydney was going to have a nervous breakdown if she didn't leave her house. I hung up the phone while she was saying something, but I didn't really care what she had to say. I was prepared for our meeting. Sydney had told me my wife would be home at 1 p.m. the next day, so I had spent the rest of the day preparing my notes. When you go into battle, it is essential to have a good plan, thoroughly vetted and practiced. I was ready for combat. Of course, the other part of that is that when the first shot is fired, the plan goes out the window. That is just what happened to me when Debbie came home for our meeting. She didn't just walk in the front door. She stormed through it and screamed, "Where are you?" Her eyes were already wide as she saw me sitting at the table with my notes spread neatly before me. Without waiting for any comment from me, breathing fire, she continued her tirade, "There is not going to be any damn divorce." As I previously mentioned, my wife was a school teacher and history was her favorite subject. She was particularly knowledgeable about the American Civil War period. It was obvious to me that she had employed Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain of the U.S. 20th Maine Strategy at Little Round Top on the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg. Circumstances had placed Chamberlain's 20th Maine on the extreme left flank of the Union Army, and it was the only regiment standing between Lee's Confederate Army and Washington, D.C. The fighting was fierce, and Chamberlain's men were exhausted and nearly out of ammunition. Their casualties were extremely high and all seemed lost. Then Chamberlain, a rather nondescript college professor of rhetoric and civilian life, did the one thing no one anticipated: he ordered what troops he had remaining to charge. They did, and essentially the Union was saved. Well, that is exactly what my wife did to me. She charged when she should have been on the defensive, and I was completely overwhelmed. The next thing I knew, I was on her bed, lying on my back naked, and Debbie was riding me with her hands on my chest, still screaming.